and has been posted in the meeting room and in the entrance hall in Town Hall, all pursuant to Section 13 of the Open Public Meetings Act.
Roll call.
Mrs. Abrams?
Here.
Mr. Hearn?
Here.
Mr. LaCresti?
Here.
Mr. Lucarelli?
Here.
Mr. Vanatopoulos? Mr. Pesci?
Here.
Mr. Briamonte?
Here.
Mrs. Tedesco?
Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. LaCresti.
Allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please remain standing for a moment of silence to honor our military and police who have been wounded or killed in action. Thank you. Please be seated.
Continued public hearing, item number 1. New Jersey Natural Gas Company, NJNG, 960 Holmdel Road, Block 13, Lot 13, in the LO-2 zone, preliminary and final site plan number 2018-1. Applicant seeks variance to construct a proposed regulator station, access and utilities located within a 16.51 acre site owned by Holmdel Venture LLC, an improved office park and cell tower.
Good evening, board members. Nancy Skidmore from Connell Foley. I'm here on behalf of the applicant, New Jersey Natural Gas Company. This is a continued public hearing on an application for preliminary and final site plan, and includes relief for conditional use variance, and both variances for the site located at 960 Holmdel Road. And our proposal is for the installation of a regulator station within the OL2 zone of the township. As the board might recall, at the last hearing on October 10th, you heard testimony from our expert real estate appraiser, Jeff Otto. You also heard testimony from Rich Redding, who is our expert in economics of land use. Mr. Otto provided the board with an overview and the summary of the analysis he undertook and the conclusions he reached in the market study report that he prepared and filed with the board. Mr. Redding also provided the board with an overview of his investigation and the conclusions contained in the fiscal impact analysis that he prepared and filed with the board. With me tonight, I have Christine Cafone, who is my expert planner. She is my first and only witness for the evening, so unless the board has any preliminary matters that it would like to address, I would call my first witness, Christine Cafone.
Please do.
Ms. Cafone.
You swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Just state your name and spell it for the record.
Christine, C-H-R-I-S-T-I-N-E. Nazaro, N-A-Z-Z-A-R-O. Cafone, C-O, F as in Frank, O-N-E. My business address is 125 Half Mile Road, Suite 200, Red Bank, New Jersey, 07701.
Ms. Cafone, can you please provide the board with the benefit of your background and educational experience, and as well as work experience in the field of planning?
Yes, good evening, Chair and members of the board. I'm a licensed professional planner by exam in the state of New Jersey. I also hold an AICP, which is an American Institute of Certified Planners exam. I testified here before this board and qualified as an expert witness in about 420 other boards throughout the state of New Jersey, as well as the Superior Court System of New Jersey. I am an affordable housing special master in about 25 to 30 different towns, working for about 7 different judges throughout the state. In addition to that, I teach planning and zoning courses. I teach for the Rutgers Center for Government Services, where I teach planning and zoning courses. I was also an adjunct professor at Monmouth University, where I taught a special topics in real estate course in the spring last year. In addition to that, my business is also, before we do some municipal work, not much. We represent the Casino Redevelopment Authority as their planner. We do municipal work for Seabright. We've done some redevelopment work for them. But by and large, my practice is appearing before planning and zoning boards as an expert witness.
Any objection?
No.
We will accept her.
Thank you. Ms. Cafone, have you had an opportunity to review the documents that are relevant to the current application that's before the board?
Yes, I reviewed all of the submission documents. I reviewed the review letters that were prepared by the board's professionals, as well as the various municipal agencies which review the plans. I reviewed the zoning ordinance, the master plan. I visited the subject property and the surrounding uses that surround it. I reviewed the transcripts. I read them line by line of all the 3 hearings, September 12th to 26th, as well as October 10th, which I was not present, so I did read those transcripts. And again, I reviewed all of the application submission documents, which would be the reports that were prepared by the other team members.
Ms. Capone, can you take the board through your analysis of the proposal and the conclusions you've drawn with regard to the proofs required for the variance and waiver relief that we seek?
Sure. Well, obviously, we're here seeking improvements for improvements that we believe are necessary for a natural gas regulator facility, which are necessary to provide continued safe and reliable natural gas service to Holmdel Township and neighboring community residents. The subject property is located on Holmdel Road in the OL2 zone. The property is a developed property. There's an 80,000 square foot campus style building on this property. It's 2 buildings. It's a pretty large facility. There's looks like a bike share in the back of it, where it looks like either tenants or employees of the office building can rent those bikes. It's a cell tower on the facility. We are surrounded on 3 sides by OL2 zoning. So to the south, to the west, and to the north is OL2 zoning. To the east, across from us, is the R4 or residential zoning. So the site is bounded to the south and the west by a solar farm, to the north by a commercial development, which when I had an opportunity to go out there, it was called Highland, Hylan development. So clearly an occupied commercial use, it looks to me like. And then on the west is farmland in addition to the solar facility, and on the east is the residential dwelling, and the farm and the Fox Hollow Winery is also further to the east. So the proposed improvements include a gas reduction facility to reduce pressure reduction, which is accomplished via the regulators. We are proposing a series of improvements in about 5 different easements that we have, which will encumber the property. The lion's share of the proposed improvements are underground and piping, but we do have a control box and the heater and the regulator, which will be above the ground. So the piping, valves, and regulators in the control box will be a maximum of 4 to 6 feet above the ground, and the heater unit will be a maximum of 15 feet, including the 3 heater vents. So all that equipment will be located above the ground. We are proposing an extensive berming and screening package. In fact, 2 of the easements that we secured are specifically to create a berm and to install landscaping. In addition to that, we are also proposing an 8 to 12 foot high chain link fence with wood slats in it, and that will screen the proposed improvements. And we are also proposing an 8 foot high sound wall on the inside of that fence to mitigate any impacts and screen the facility. We are not requiring any sewer service or water service. There's no parking or lighting required for this project. We will not have any employees. The site will be visited approximately 2 times per year. It's a pretty benign facility. Any lighting that would be required is either onboarded on the trucks that would visit the property or would be brought in. So we're certainly not proposing any lighting here. The site is again in the OL2 office laboratory zoning, which ironically actually permits public utilities conditionally, so long as you meet 6 conditions, which we meet all 6 of them. So I would submit to the board, and I'll go through that a little bit later in my testimony, but I think it's important for, to frame the planning testimony that this is an OL2 zoning district. The reason this board has jurisdiction of this application is not because the public utility is not a permitted use. It's because we need a D3 variance for multiple permitted uses on 1 lot. So when I had an opportunity to look at the OL2 zone where this property is located, there's a couple of things I think certainly that are important here from a planning point of view. Are you picking me up?
Just sorry to interrupt you there, Christine, for a moment. I think you misspoke. You said you needed D3 for the additional principal use.
I'm sorry, D1.
Okay.
We need a D1 for the additional principal use. I did. We don't need a D3 for unmet conditional use standards because there are 6 conditional use standards. We either meet them or they don't apply to us. So we don't need a D3. If we violated one of those, we would be before the board for a D3. We're here for a D1 because we needed an additional principal use. So again, going back to the OL2 zone where this property sits and what is allowed there, what is permissible in this zoning district is hardly what I would consider from a planning point of view a bucolic list of uses. The purpose of the zoning district, and this is not my language, this is right out of section 30-141.2 of your ordinance, the purpose of these districts, and it's referring to the OL 1, 2, and 3 districts collectively, is to establish the zoning districts for office development, recognizing highway access and existing uses, as well as tracts owned by or already developed for large lot research office use. And then it goes on to talk about the provision of assisting lower income housing, which is not applicable to this application. Uses allowed by right are a building or group of buildings in single ownership for the following purposes: farms, as outlined in the R40A district, offices devoted exclusively to professional, executive, engineering, accounting, scientific research and development, statistical and financial purposes, laboratories devoted exclusively to research, product development, and testing, engineering development, and sales development, a conference center. All uses permitted under 2, 3, and 4 above shall be required to participate in the township's efforts to produce lower income housing, child care centers, retail farm markets. Then it goes on to cite some accessory uses, and when you get to the conditional uses, the first conditional use permissible is a public utility. The second is a wireless telecommunication antenna or tower, and the third is a church or house of worship. So those are the litany of uses that are available to a developer or somebody, an interested party, as of right on this property. So from a planning point of view, I think that that's an enormous thing to consider when you look at the fact that we're asking for relief for a use that's actually conditionally permitted in the zone. I think legislatively, the governing body has already decided that public utilities are appropriate in this location. The D variance relief that's before you tonight is to add the third principal use. So it's a D1 variance for the third principal use. In addition to that, we need a couple of bulk variances. We need a variance to exceed the permitted fence height where only 6 and 8 feet are allowed for an open wire, and we are proposing 8 and 12 feet. That, in my opinion, I'll talk about the bulks later on. It's clearly a better zoning alternative that provides additional screening. We are required to have a sign on this property. The sign is very small. Signs are required to be attached to a main building, so clearly we're not even proposing a building, so there's no way we could comply with that. The sign is 16 by 22 inches. It's a very small sign. There was a detail provided of this sign in the site plan package that was given to you, and all it is simply it has the New Jersey Natural Gas logo on it, and then station number. And the way it reads on the detail is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but you get the gist of that small little sign that's going to be on the northern portion of the fence. We're asking for a minimum lot area requirement of 16.51 acres, where 30 is required in the zone. This is an existing condition. Whether this application is approved or denied, this application is not exacerbated or is not improved by this application. And this variance has been granted previously by the board. So to the extent the board requires that we re-request variance relief and don't subscribe to the belief that it runs with the land, we would re-request that lot area variance for 16.51 acres where 30 is required. But again, that's a variance that has been historically granted by this board for this particular piece of property. We're also asking for coverage variance relief, including building coverage to the extent, again, that's required. We're not proposing any buildings, and maximum lot coverage. We are increasing the lot coverage by 328 square feet, so we're increasing it by 0.04%. So on a site of this size, it's pretty, when you have an 80,000 square foot building, you have a 328 increase in lot coverage, so it's a pretty de minimis increase. And the board's granted that. I'll talk about that a little bit more as well. There were other 3 variances that we identified in our notice as potential variances. I would agree with Mrs. Bucci-Carter, who indicates in her April 3rd, 2018 review of this application, her review letter, that neither she or the zoning officer called them out as variances. And I think that that was proper because they relate to building setbacks. So to the extent that they would be required, it would be a 37-foot side yard setback to the south, a street setback of 186 where 400 is required, and a distance to a residential zone of 266 where 600 is required. But again, the ordinance is very clear that these are building setbacks. The structures that we are proposing are unroofed, uninhabitable structures, so they don't apply, which is presumptively why in the review letter of your planner, it's indicated that neither she or the zoning officer identified these as variances, because it's very difficult from a planning point of view to come to the conclusion that building setbacks should be applied to structures. So in addition to that relief, we are also asking for 2 waivers. We're asking for waivers for the installation of sidewalks and curbing, and I think certainly those are very reasonable waivers. There are no sidewalks and curbing on this side of the road, on either side of the road here, so to install them for these very minimal improvements would seem to be onerous and not reasonable in my opinion. It is my intention to argue this evening that we are an inherently beneficial use. An inherently beneficial use is a use which is universally understood or considered to be of a value to the community because it fundamentally serves the public good and promotes the general welfare. Such a use includes but is not limited to a hospital, school, child care center, group home, or a wind, solar, or photovoltaic energy facility or structure. So that is the municipal land use law definition of inherently beneficial use, and the courts have certainly held public utilities to be inherently beneficial use. So what that means to us is that as a D variance, we are guided by the SECA balancing test and not the Medici. So the SECA balancing test is really a 4-pronged test, and the 4 prongs to it are initially to identify the public interest at stake, to identify the substantial detrimental effects that would ensue from the grant of the variance. And I emphasize that word substantial because the substantial dents would have to outweigh any benefits. And then we determine whether, if any, we can reduce by imposing reasonable conditions, determine whether it can reduce any substantial detriment by imposing reasonable conditions on the use, and then you weigh the positives and benefits. So the first prong in that test is to identify the public interest at stake. Here we have a use that will promote the general welfare by providing continued safe and reliable natural gas service that will provide heat and hot water to Holmdel residents. This will allow energy to heat homes, operate businesses, appliances, thereby supporting the basic necessities of food and shelter for our community and the community beyond. Per Craig Sanders' direct testimony relative to the existing system, and this came right from his direct testimony, requires continuous maintenance, is ineffective, and it's not sustainable. So this is something that New Jersey Natural Gas is looking to improve and upgrade and ensure that they have the ability to continue to provide safe and reliable natural gas to their clients. The proposed gas station will enable the essential reduction of gas pressure required to deliver gas to our residential homes. The proposed station heater will prevent the serious freezing conditions that are currently occurring over at the temporary underground regular station at the Vonage site, and therefore will prevent a potential gas outage to Holmdel residents that could otherwise result from the current freezing condition. And I know there's extensive testimony in the record and a series of photos that were previously demonstrated that that is a real and legitimate concern, and those freezing conditions are certainly occurring over at the Vonage property. When you look at the fact that there are approximately 6,100 meters served in Holmdel, of that which 5,791 are residential meters, and you look at the fact that Holmdel had a 2016 population estimate of 16,673 residents, simple division will tell you that if you divide the number of residents by the number of residential meters, the total meters is 6,100, the residential is 5,791, you come to about 2.8 persons. So with that population, you could agree, or you can conclude that almost all of the residents of Holmdel would be benefiting from the upgrade of this system, as they are clients of New Jersey Natural Gas and served by your facilities. So that's the promoting of the general welfare, and the first prong is to continue providing this gas to our residential population in Holmdel. It's important. We all like heat and hot water, and to be able to use these things and run our appliances in our house. So I think we would like to see that continue delivered safely to the community. The next is to identify the substantial detrimental effects that would ensue from the grant of a variance. And I say this not only when I'm testifying here tonight, but I have testified, like I said, qualified as an expert witness before over 400 boards. So whenever I'm talking about the negative criteria, it is a habit in my practice to always remind the board that the board does not ask you to hold us or any other applicants to the standard that there will be no detriment. The test is that we have to identify substantial detrimental effects that would ensue from the grant of the variance and then weigh the benefits against the detriment. So here, in my opinion, there are no actual detriments, let alone substantial detriments. We have uncontroverted testimony in the record so far as the lack of impacts. There are no buildings proposed, so building and setback standards are not applicable. This is a closed system, which my understanding from that means that there are no odors, and we have had experts testify to the site engineering, landscaping, and lack of impacts regarding aesthetics, safety, air, water quality, noise, real estate, and fiscal impact. That is a lot of testimony to be provided on a use that is actually conditionally permitted in the zone, in an OL2 zone that allows for a myriad of intensive uses. And I will address the collective lack of negative impacts identified by our team at more depth in the negative criteria. I think that there are some here that really bear just repeating, because again, the test under the SECA is to identify the substantial detriments. Mr. Potenza concluded that the project complies with the state noise code and the local standards adopted in the noise ordinance in Chapter 3. The project-generated noise levels would be lower than the existing daytime or nighttime noise levels and will not be noticeable at the surrounding residences, which is not the test. The test is at the property line. And the project will have no adverse noise impact on the surrounding community and with the proposed mitigation in place, as shown on the plan. With respect to air quality, we had testimony from Mr. Potenza that the facility will not result in any adverse air quality impacts at the nearby commercial office use, residential uses, or agricultural land uses. One of the impacts he testified to, and he said that when referring to carbon monoxide specifically, that you would need about 9,000 heaters to be operating simultaneously for an impact to be realized. And the reason he presented that was in order to reach the NJDEP levels in which we need a permit. So he said, and if anything, this is just one example of why the heater is not considered a significant source and not required to have an air permit by the NJDEP. So there are no discernible impacts to public health, which is the primary, or public welfare secondary, related to crops, vegetation, visibility, or health. Transitioning to water quality, it was found in the water quality study, and I believe this was a response to something that was raised, as I understand it, not by an air quality or water quality expert, such as Mr. Potenza, who's been doing this for 40 years, but it was raised in perhaps one of the commission review letters. Based on the findings of the air quality study that Mr. Potenza did, there is no potential for any project air pollution impacts on water quality through atmospheric deposition, whereby precipitation may carry airborne pollutants to earth-affecting water bodies. So what I read that as is that means none of the particles that we would be releasing from our proposed facilities, there's no way that that's getting into any of the water bodies. That was his conclusion of our air and water quality expert, having doing this for 40 years preparing these studies. Our real estate value expert did an investigation of other natural gas regulator stations in New Jersey and determined that the presence of such stations has no effect on nearby residential or commercial property values. Mr. Otto further concluded that the value of nearby agricultural and public lands will be unaffected due to the limited use potential resulting from farmland preservation and green acre restrictions. Mr. Weiner testified that as far as the aesthetic impact, there's not going to be an aesthetic impact. And we spent countless hours as a project team filing over the landscaping plans, the views from adjoining properties. So I think when you look at the fact that these facilities, the regulator and the heater is actually set back over 200 feet from the property line, but you're simply just not going to see this. So I think certainly there is a demonstrated lack of impacts here. The next prong in the SECA balancing test to determine whether it can reduce any substantial detriments by imposing reasonable conditions on the site. And that word reasonable is not my word. I didn't throw it in there for a fact. It comes, it comes right from the case, and it's reasonable conditions. The key here, they have to be reasonable, and they have to have the effect of reducing the substantial detrimental impacts. So we have designed this site plan with an extensive amount of elements that, in my opinion, speak to what would be considered as reasonable conditions in an application such as this. First of all, the site slopes down about 12 feet to the facility, and then in addition to that, we introduced a number of items in order to prevent anyone from seeing this from Holmdel Road. We have a 5-foot berm that comes up to the wall and that goes higher than the wall itself, and that's what the L-shaped easement, which is to the it's to the north and to the east of our facility. So we have a nice L-shaped easement. Then beyond that, you have an 80-foot, and on top of that berm, we have planted 12 to 14-foot evergreens. And that's the planting height. We're not planting wisps and hoping that they grow to that height. That will be their planting height. And then we have an 8 and 12-foot wood-slatted fence around the entirety of the facility. And then additionally, we put evergreen shrubs and deciduous trees to make it so that it blends into the landscape. And then I love the way our landscape architect considered it a preemptive row of evergreens. So the preemptive row of evergreens is that 80-foot easement that sits off of Holmdel Road, just yet another layer of what I would consider a reasonable condition. So I would imagine that if the board were to approve this application, and I certainly hope from a planning point of view that you do, that you would incorporate all of those things, because those are reasonable conditions that would have the effect of lessening any impacts of this proposed facility. What is not, in my opinion, a reasonable facility is to have your professionals who are admitted industry land use leaders, been doing this for a long time, but who have admittedly never designed one of these facilities. So collectively, your board professionals have zero experience in designing one of these facilities. So I don't think that the redesign of this would be left to people who have not done it before. When you have an applicant with 66 years of experience who makes it their business to ensure that the public is delivered safe and reliable natural gas. So I think that, again, all services necessary for the transmission and distribution of electricity and gas, including but not limited to safety, reliability, metering, meter reading, and billing, shall remain the jurisdiction of the BPU. So respectfully, I do not think that the design of this facility is before the board. I think reasonable conditions are certainly before the board, but the design of this facility is certainly not before the board. And then the last test in the SECA test is to weigh the positive and negative criteria and determine if the variance would create a substantial detriment to the public good. So in my professional opinion, the continued provision of safe and reliable natural gas service to Holmdel residents with a facility that will not be seen, you cannot smell it, you cannot hear it, it will not negatively impact the adjoining property values, and it is in an area that is zoned for this. Again, I want to keep getting back to, this is not a bucolic neighborhood of multi-million-dollar homes where we're dropping this facility in, not screening it and hoping for the best. We're placing it on an existing developed campus of 80,000 square feet with a cell tower in an OL zone. So I think that's very important for the board to continue to hear. So moving into the D1 variance and the conditional use standards, again, we are here for the D1 variance for the principal use, and I would just like to go through the conditional use standards, even though it has not been anybody's opinion that we would violate any of them. Conditional uses of public utilities are permitted conditionally in the OL2 zone, and the first condition is that public utility structures that provide direct utility services, but excluding offices, repair garages, and similar commercial industrial related uses of utility companies shall be permitted, and then it gives a litany of various zones, including the OL2. So the proposed use is comprised of utility structures. It is not an office, it's not a repair garage, so it's certainly consistent with the type of public utility structure that was envisioned for the OL2 zone. The next conditional use standard is not applicable. It references in the M district, public utilities shall be permitted, provided they comply with the bulk and design criteria for medical office buildings. It's not applicable. The next conditional use standard reads, this is also, in my opinion, not applicable because it reads that in the OL 1, 2, and 3 districts, public utility offices shall be permitted, provided they comply with the C1 district regulations. And then it goes on to read that repair garages and other industrially related uses of utility facilities shall also be permitted, but we are neither of those things. We're not an office, nor are we a repair garage or other industrial related uses. So how I interpret that is that if New Jersey Natural Gas wanted to have a maintenance fleet operated out of here, then they would have to comply with those standards. But because we're not doing that, we are a direct utility that doesn't apply to us. The next one is that site plan specifications and a statement setting forth the need and purpose of the installation shall be filed with the planning board. Certainly we filed that with the board, and extensive testimony was provided by Mr. Sanders as far as the need. The next conditional use is proof shall be furnished that the proposed installation in a specific location is necessary and convenient for the efficiency of the public or private utility system, or the satisfactory and convenient provision of service by the utility to the neighborhood or area in which the particular use is located. That was specifically addressed by Mr. Sanders. The need was, and in the site suitability discussion, which I will bootstrap this within the end of my testimony and talk about site suitability if this weren't an inherently beneficial use, but the New Jersey Natural Gas site selection criteria, as I understand them, certainly primarily New Jersey Natural Gas looks for proximity to its transmission lines running in Holmdel, on Holmdel Road. And then the site must be as close as possible to the southern end of the pump system. And the other criteria that New Jersey Natural Gas uses to choose a site is being located in a commercial or utility zone, which this is, avoiding preserved or green acres properties, this is a commercially zoned property, avoiding wetlands or properties with low-lying areas, it's not in a wetland area, avoiding sites with environmental or contamination issues, or sites with little or no tree clearing, they don't want to have to clear a substantial amount of trees, and preferring to locate facilities on already developed land. So when you look at all those criteria, with the transmission lines in Holmdel Road and the location being close as possible to the southern end of the pump system, this is a great location for this facility, particularly when you have public utility zoning allowed here and it's a commercial zone. And then the last conditional use is also not applicable because it references design of any structures being within 200 feet of a residential zone or use, and this property is not, or the proposed uses are a minimum of 266 feet to the proposed residential zone. So certainly that does not apply. We meet all of the D3 standards, so a D3 variance is not required. As far as the multiple principal uses on one lot, this is not a violation of something that comes out of the OL2 zone. It comes out of section 30-89 of the ordinance here in Holmdel, which reads as follows. No lot shall have more than one principal permitted use or one principal building, except that non-residential and certain residential developments normally having more than one principal building and or a mix of uses may be permitted more than one principal use or building on a lot, provided that the development has site plan approval and all buildings comply with all yard, industrial, or office park requirements. Examples of developments having more than one principal use or building include shopping centers, industrial complexes, office developments, motels and conference centers, townhomes, and other multifamily complexes and mobile home parks. So when you look at that section of the ordinance, it's very difficult from a planning point of view when your ordinance specifically references office developments of being those type of uses that are examples of developments where more than one principal use might be located. Very difficult from a planning point of view to come to the conclusion that we would be having a substantial detriment on the zone plan here in Holmdel by the introduction of the third use. That conclusion is further supported in addition to the documents that I reviewed as far as our submission documents. I did review the resolutions from prior approvals on this application, or on the site, specifically with regard to the cell tower. When that cell tower was found to be improved, when the cell tower was approved, I should say, there was found to be no negative impacts because the use was passive. There will be no traffic, employees, population increase, noise, or other detrimental impacts. And further, that all of the variances were either pre-existing or very modestly increased the extent of the variance of the pre-existing condition, and that was with respect to the lot coverage. So in the instant application, I don't see how you could conclude anything but when you have another passive use with no traffic, no employees, no population increase, and no noise or other detrimental impacts. So I think certainly the introduction of the third use on this is not going to have a substantial negative impact on the public good, or certainly not on the zone plan when you have an ordinance that actually identifies office developments as a place where you might find multiple permitted uses. So moving into the C variances. We need several C variances. That was the burden of proof for the D variance if we are coming in under the inherently beneficial use standards. I'm going to talk a little bit at the end of my testimony what the proofs would be if we were a non-inherently beneficial use. But I think for right now, the 6 C variances that we are asking for are the lot area variances of 16.51 versus 30, which I think is clearly a C1 under the hardship criteria because the existing condition. We have a lot coverage variance. It's an incredibly de minimis increase of 328 square feet. So I think that C2, that the benefits to be derived from this application would certainly outweigh that. I think that you could rely on criteria G of the land use law, which talks about sufficient space and appropriate locations for that lot coverage variance, and also criteria M, an efficient use of the land. Criteria C2 is a fence and wall height variance. So I think clearly there, I mean, we could build a lower fence, but I think the benefit of having additional screening and the fact that you won't be able to see those proposed structures, I think the board can grant that as a C2 as a better zoning alternative to have the additional fencing and wall height. And you could use criteria I, creating a desirable visual environment for that. The sign variance, I would consider that a hardship variance. Tiny sign, it's de minimis, and we are required by law to have it. And there's no way to comply because it has to be on the main building, attached to the main building, which we certainly just cannot do that and comply with the regulations. And then the other building setback variances, although, again, I agree with the planner that they're not required, and that would be the setbacks of 37 feet versus 200 to the side property line to the south, as well as the distance of 186 feet to the street setback, and a distance to a residential zone of 266 versus 600. Again, reminding the board those are building setback variances and not applicable as we are proposing new buildings. And I believe that these variances, that there will be no negative impacts due to the fact that we are proposing an extensive landscaping package, and our prior experts have demonstrated a complete lack of impacts. In the fiscal impact analysis that was prepared by Mr. Redding, he concluded that from any perspective, the construction and operation of the proposed regulator stations would either have no measurable impact on municipal, school, or county services, or alternatively, make a positive fiscal contribution to a property that already generates substantially greater revenues than public service costs allocated to its operation. The market study report prepared by the Otto Group concluded, our investigation of existing natural gas regulator stations in New Jersey has determined that their presence has no effect on nearby residential or community property values. We have further concluded that the value of nearby agricultural and public lands will also be unaffected due to their limited use potential. Therefore, it is my considered opinion to a reasonable degree of certainty that the approval of the proposed regulator station to be constructed on the subject property will not have any adverse impact on neighborhood property values. Again, going on in the potenta and the negative criteria, continuing on in the negative criteria, based on the findings, the air quality study performed for the New Jersey Natural Gas Regulator Station, the facility will not result in any adverse air quality impacts at the commercial office use or on the project site at the nearby residential and agricultural land uses. The proposed natural NJNG regulation will not emit any odors. Again, going on to the findings by Potenza, based on the findings of the air quality study, there is no potential for any project air pollution impacts on water quality through atmospheric deposition. So in my professional opinion, the requested C variances certainly can be granted with no substantial detriment to the board, or to the public good, to the zone plan, or to the area that surrounds this. In regard to the design waivers, it would be impractical for the applicant to provide sidewalks and curbing as none exist out there. So if in fact this were a non-inherently beneficial use, then what we would have to demonstrate to this board tonight is that we would meet the particular suitability criteria for the grants of a non-inherently beneficial use. So when you are dealing with one of the inherently beneficial uses, you are presumptively assumed to meet the particular suitability criteria. So when you have a site that is already developed with an 80,000 square foot office building and a cell tower in a zone that allows for public utilities, in a site, I'm not going to go through the New Jersey natural gas site selection criteria again, because I think that this is a textbook site when you start to apply those criteria to it. I am again challenged as a land use planner how you would come to the conclusion that this site is not suitable for the proposed use. I really struggle with the concept of something being conditionally permitted in the zone, meeting all of the applicable conditions, and then the site not being suitable for that use. It's a very difficult and foreign concept for me as a planner to come to. So I certainly think that even if this were a non-inherently beneficial use, I am more than confident in my professional opinion that we would sustain particular suitability proofs because of the characteristics of this property. This again is not a bucolic residential setting, and even if it were, this use is such that our expert team, who has collective decades of experience and, in my opinion, to put on the extensive proofs that we did with respect to an air